Thank you very much indeed. I'm honoured to be asked to speak to the Business Forum. I'm going to talk for about 50 minutes and then hopefully show some pictures of Scott's expedition mixed with similar package holidays that I've run over 50 years after Captain Scott, who died 100 years ago, and this is his centenary year. Now, cast your minds back. In the short polar summer of 1911-1912, 100 years ago, 5 Brits and 5 Norwegians, who are still our group's enemy today, raced each other to the bottom of the world. But only the Norwegians came back. What happened to the British? We should know, since over 50 biographies have since been written about the leader, Scott. But there were no witnesses to their deaths. So a few biographers, without experience of the realities, have played many tunes and invented many twists to the tragedy and told many lies. In this book, I have done what my predecessors could not do. I have put myself in the place of the British explorers and used logic based on personal experience to reconstruct those events. No previous Scott biographer has man-hauled a heavy sledge load through the great crevasse fields of the Beardmore Glacier, explored ice fields never before seen by man, or walked 1,000 miles on poisoned feet. To write about hell, it helps if you yourself have been there. Slowly, freezing and starving to death over 2.5 weeks, beside Bowers and Wilson, not using the opium tablets which they had in order to commit suicide because they knew it would be a horrible death, not using them for moral purposes, any of them, Scott also died. And a controversial legend was born which 90 years on, and 100 years on today, still retains the fascination and power to spark bitter debate and to raise hackles. Scott remains an enigma, and Wilson's hope that you will come to know him and believe in him has not been realized despite 4 dozen biographies. Through 2 world wars, the Scott story was used as an heroic example of how to live and how to face death when fighting for your country. Since the 1980s, Britain has looked more askance at her past, and led by a different type of biographer, the modern cynical version of the popular Scott story has become one of total failure. A failure caused by typical British imperialistic qualities at a time when the empire was beginning to wane. A modern biographer who paints a picture of any early 20th century individual using the critical yardstick of today's moral and social standards will produce a mere cartoon or spitting image of the original personality. And I know that the present-day Scott story is a travesty of the truth. So you are Scott, a bloke in the Royal Navy, the Navy's expert on the new type of torpedo warfare, which the big German Navy in the First World War was about to be using, and mine warfare, was asked by the Geographical Society to leave the Navy and his huge promotion prospects to go into an unknown area. He had some experience because down in Plymouth where he was, he had thrown snowballs at his sisters. He had no predilection, in his own words, to go down and do adventurous stuff, but he was selected by the Geographical Society to be our representative to go down there. Now, in -40, never mind -70, which is what we'll be facing next year, you use very careful face protection. Not only is it frostbite, but it's also your eyes get sun blindness, the cold wind cuts into them, you get retinal sun blindness, facial protection. Well, Scott was the guy that invented the hood, and he had a copper wire in the outside of the hood so you could squash it and move it around. Very clever. The copper didn't mind the cold and so on. And I suppose 55 years later, we were using pretty much the same. That's Dr. Mike Stroud, with whom then and now I do polar expeditions. Food, then and now. Scott had biscuits made which were very special full of calories, full of fat and the right carbs and so on. And his rations worked out at 4,800 calories, weighing 2.5 pounds. Now, when we were man-hauling, the first man-haul in the 1990s, myself and Dr. Mike Stroud, the nutritionist, he designed food copying the original Captain Scott's nutrition versus weight. And as you may know, you get far more calories out of fat than you do out of carbohydrates or protein. And Mike stuffed our rations to 62% fat for 97 days. If you have more than 20% fat, it would be bad for you. You might get diabetes, or not diabetes, but cholesterol and other things like that. Therefore, you shouldn't. But he did, and I could understand why he did. And because he was our top nutritionist, I didn't revolt and did eat it, and then thereafter got a massive heart attack, which I blamed on him. This was his ship. If you look carefully in the background, it was called the Terra Nova. That was in 1910, and it dropped him and his men off, and it was supplied to him by a company called Bowring Brothers. They were the top insurance brokers until about 1978, when there was a hostile bid for them by an American company called Marsh McLennan. At that time, we were after a ship, and that was our ship, 1979. I managed to get that sponsored half by Bowring and half by Marsh McLennan. So we painted the name of one on one side and one on the other. It was a 40-year-old ship. Because they came together, the hostile bid by Marsh became friendly. So we sort of helped. And that is a motto for anyone who's merging in the future. Sponsor us with a ship. Scott was very, very keen on not making do with the status quo. Technically, he would use every possible modern thing. He knew that when he reached this unknown coastline, he would want to see what was inland. He discovered that there were these balloons which could take people up, and you could then look a long way and take photographs. And so he was the first ever to use a balloon in that particular thing in 1902. You may recognize the gentleman. That was at the end of an expedition when we came back, showing him a new modern steel, which, strangely enough, British Aerospace had given us for requirements which were very special that we would need. We even used NASA for our expedition mapping, getting photographs, detailed photographs of crevasse fields so we can work out the way through them. We use anything that is available, as Scott did. He used whatever means he could. He knew that dogs were what Eskimos and Norwegians and Canadians used. Therefore, he took dogs with him. And he took someone who knew how to drive dogs. We took dogs. That was our dog. It later became British Pet of the Year. It was called Bothy. It was a pain in the neck. Guinness Book of Records, the only dog ever to have peed on both poles. Another problem down there, another danger, is frostbite. One of Scott's people there with quite severe frostbite. Your feet, of course, another problem. That is after only 10 days on an Antarctic expedition, a 3-month expedition. We knew that by the end of the 3 months we would have skin grafts on our feet, normally taken by skin off your hip. That's the end of the toes. That's very painful for the first hour. Then your feet get very cold and it stops being painful. The blisters on the hands will fill up with ice balls at minus 90 average on your ski sticks. You arrive at the tent at night. If you shake your hand in your mitts, it sounds like castanets. Why did Scott go down there? Why do people like our group still go down there? Lots of different motives, one of which, of course, is to be first for yourself and for the country that you represent. We have huge historic records for our group. Science. Every expedition we have done has taken scientists with us. The Royal Society's vice president and the chairman of our science committee for the next expedition. It's very important. Charity, we raise huge amounts for charity. Last year, Just Giving awarded me top UK fundraiser. That was 6.3 million for Marie Curie. The next expedition will raise a hell of a lot more than that. Charity and science, but you've got to remember, that the great man, Captain Scott, his expeditions also did charity and also did science. In fact, I would summarize by saying that without any question of doubt, Scott's 2 expeditions into Antarctica, including when he died down there, produced infinitely more scientific information about Antarctica than all the other international polar expeditions of the first half of the 20th century. A brilliant man. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.